So databases, there's never, as I said before, I mean, everything's kind of blurry, right? So I'm going to say this, and it's going to be mostly true, except in some weird cases, right? Databases typically live on the server side, or what we call the back end. So you guys have already been, on the client side. Just a refresher, you guys have your web browser, be it Chrome, Safari, whatever you're using, Internet Explorer in some cases. You have your client side, which makes requests of the server on the back end, the backside. The server interacts with the application that you have defined, your Finstagram application in this case, so whatever you've created, and this application in turn talks to the database. So you got at least three individual pieces of software on the server side that's just serving up information for the client side. Databases are where we store individual user data, or well, not even necessarily. I mean, that's kind of a gross generalization, but we store the data that's going to change the appearance of our website or our web application. So today, very basic stuff as always. Intro. Talk about just the basic concepts of relational databases, and I bet that most of you you may have even used one before. I think you're going to grasp that pretty quickly. This stuff is becoming more and more common knowledge. What we will talk about a new concept called the object relational model. So it's a pretty fancy thing. These are just the objects. This is data that you retrieve from your database. And it's packaged in a nice way so that the Ruby programmer, or the Sinatra developer, however you want to describe yourself, can use this data just as he would a normal Ruby object. That is what the ORM does. It takes information of the database, bundles it up as a Ruby object. Programmer does whatever is required. This all lends itself to the ultimate goal of putting your Instagram posts inside the database. Because right now, up until this point, you've hard-coded them and you've encoded them as hash objects. So a hash, for what you guys are seeing, a hash in one of these active record ORM objects, these things that we're taking out of the database, they're not going to be that much different. They're very different underneath the surface, but on the surface, you guys are just going to treat them as you would any object, which is therein lies the strength of the ORM. So you'll see the wisdom behind this as we work through. Okay, so what is a relational database? When we talk about databases, we talk about typically tables, rows, and columns. Data is, good databases organize data in tables. And when I'm thinking of these things, I think of in terms of like real world objects, proper nouns, people, places, and things. Well, I guess not proper nouns, but people, places, and things. So I would say, okay, well, I want to look at, I don't know, I maybe I run a veterinary clinic and I have animals, which are also dogs and cats. And I'd probably want to organize all my dogs into a dog table, all my cats into a cat table. That's a very naive example, but that's the kind of thing that we're working with here. Find those objects and collect information about them, store them in a database table. The data in the database table is organized in rows. So every single entry in your database occupies a row in that database. The columns denote the type. So this is very similar to the hash where you have the key value pair, except we're just organizing it in rows and columns. It's a good example coming up next. So this is not a database. This is Microsoft Excel, but this is the exact same concept. This is why I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with this, because very few of us haven't used Microsoft Excel. Every single row is a new entry. Every single column corresponds. So I think of these in terms of key value pairs. So not unlike the data structure that you've already defined as part of last day's coursework. Here's an example: hockey team application. Lots of different tables. These are just surface ones. I mean, the amount of statistics they collect in professional sports is just incredible. But so you could refine this further and further and further. But here's some very common sense ones. You'd have a team table, you'd have a player table, games table, goals table. I'm thinking, what else? Oh, shoot. Well, let's just stick with that. Let's not go too far down this rabbit trail because there's tons of possibilities. But let's imagine, in the team table, what some columns might be. You might have the city. What else?
Name.
The name, yes, absolutely. Um, Trying to think of some obscure examples.
How long they've been a team?
Sure, sure. And that's the thing. How long they've been a team? Like, why not? This,
How many games they have played?
sure.
How
Yeah.
many games they have win or lost?
Yeah. So we move on to like players, and we know we have the player's first name, the last name, probably age, weight, height, all this kind of stuff. Um, then, of course, we have to create some sort of relationship to say that this player belongs to this team. Um, Likewise, certain teams play certain games. So, I mean, we have a whole bunch of different tables. All these, I guess, I'm not sure if a hockey game itself is a noun, but it is this concept that can be modeled inside of a database. Um, okay, so I think you guys have the idea. Um, Now, with Finstagram, what fields have you seen so far? How are you picturing this database?
Users,
Which one?
username.
So we'll have a user table for sure. Yeah, absolutely, which is going to store critical user information so that users can post to your feed. What else might you have?
Pictures.
Yeah, I'd say, well, pictures, I'm going to think like more in terms of like posts, the whole package, right? So in the post table, you would have the picture, and then you would have the description or whatever caption you put on the picture. So that's users, that's posts. What else might we have? Comments and likes. Yes, exactly. So I think that's all of them. So we have users, posts, comments, and likes. I think there's only four. If anyone wants to correct me. Okay. So we define these tables. We have some concept of what's going to go inside them. We have to establish relationships between them. So, for example, a post is going to belong to a certain user, and a post could potentially have many comments and could also potentially have many likes. So we have to find a way to link all these things together and establish these relationships. Oh, we kind of glossed over a whole bunch of stuff there. Okay, but you'll kind of see this. Long story short, it's like we're missing some slides. That's kind of weird. Long story short, we establish these relationships by storing one ID, one identifier in the table. So, for example, say that post table and that user table. The post belongs to the user. So in the post table, we'll have a little user ID column that points to the user to whom the post belongs. Likewise, exact same concept with comments. Comment's going to belong to a user, so it's going to have a user ID column. Comment is also going to belong to a post, so it has a post ID column, and same with likes. So that's how we establish those relationships, and you'll see that in action in the demo. Okay, so in this case, what this is talking about, it seems like we want to talk about device drivers and all that kind of stuff. But the way we talk to the database is through a piece of software, a Ruby gem called Active Record. Active Record takes care of all the stuff that used to be a pain in the butt when you're trying to interact with the database when you're a software developer. It establishes a connection between your application and your database. The database is a completely separate piece of software, and it sets it up so that your application can just ask for information or read or create new information, update information, or delete information. Sorry, I should apologize to you. This is what we use the ORM, the Object Relational Mapper. I was just talking about these relationships. This object will make it so that you can easily query these relationships, immediately know which post and which user belong to each other, which comments belong to which posts, etc., etc. This is not possible apart from an ORM. Again, I say these like kind of strong things. I'm going to chalk it up to opinion if I'm wrong or some weird outlier out there, but no. To the best of my knowledge, these kind of relationships are impossible apart from an object relational mapper. If you wanted to establish these using just SQL, as some of you may have done in your careers, we start talking about joins, left joins, outer joins, and all this kind of stuff, and joining different tables on one another. Active Record, this is how we talk to the database, does all that stuff for us, so we don't need to worry about it. We don't need to dabble in SQL. It's a good idea to have some basic knowledge, but it's not essential most of the time. Okay. Whoops, I just lost it. Okay, so here's Active Record. This allows us to perform what are called CRUD operations. Everything's got a cute name. Create, read, update, and delete. Can't do anything else on a database. That's the whole thing, right? I guess that's the only thing you can spell with CRUD. Dirk, Druck, curd operations. There you go. Making cottage cheese or something. All right. So if we, with Active Records, this introduces a level of abstraction. No longer do we have to say, insert data into columns in a long SQL query. We just create a new object and perform the operations on that. That's Active Record. So you've seen similar things. User is the table. This is that database connection, and we're just saying, okay, user table, please create a new user with this information, and we pass it in this data structure. What kind of data structure is this? Key value pairs, squiggly braces. It's a hash. So you guys have already kind of done this, right? You've already defined, you've already organized this, your data this way. You're using that exact same data structure to create a new user, for example, and all Active Record objects. So that's how you create. Oh, shoot, we don't have it. It's like someone like lifted some slides out here. That's okay. Let's do some real demo stuff here. Okay. So I'm going to bring up my Cloud9, and just because I like to build off of these previous examples, I'm going to go to September week 3. I think this is the one I want. Yeah. So just making a clone. No big deal. Rocket Stove ERB demo with database. Okay. So we're going to introduce a brand new database, because if you remember from before, I did my data structuring just like you've been doing in your coursework, just storing it as an array of hashes and then assigning it to an instance variable. So at the end of all this, we're still going to have those same instance variables, but we're going to access this data differently. We're not going to hard code it anymore. Make it truly, or at least make it a step towards being truly dynamic. Okay, and if you're also curious, I've already shown you this before, but I'll just send it as a reminder. I've got a template project that lets you whip up a Sinatra application all in one go, and it's just got all the stuff in there. So if you're inclined to experiment around a little bit, I invite you to use this. It's basically the same one as provided by Lighthouse Labs. So if you want to just get a boilerplate project with everything set up and ready to go, here you go. That's what this demonstration is built on. So it's just there as a resource for you. Okay, so we don't need this. Let's make sure it runs. Just make sure, it's always a good idea to ensure that your development environment is in a sane state. Because if you start digging too much, you might find out that something went wrong or something got misconfigured. Stuff happens. No one really knows why. I don't know how to fix that. Somehow I should be able to hide that while it loads the video, but I don't know how. Something to learn. Okay, so everything looks good. What I'm going to do here, though, ultimately, is just take all of these things that I encoded by hand. This is actually a good refresher. So in my index, oh no, I sideswiped and it reloaded the whole thing. Oh no. And now it's So this is where I left it. I had two pretty good examples here. Here's the wallpaper. Here's the image. Oh, that's not what I wanted. That's index.html. I want index.erb. So here's all the different YouTube videos. This was step one in the demo from last day. I just entered them in as HTML by hand. Then I took it a step further. So I took this because, we want to keep things dry. I reduced all that stuff down to these, how many lines? 6 lines of code. We got your for each. It's looking at every single video inside of my instance variable here. And it's producing this HTML for each pass through, it's not passing through the loop, but over each item that it looks at. So what I want to do now is going to happen in actions.rb primarily. This is all going to disappear. We're going to put this data into the database and then just do a simple retrieval. Okay, so now the reason I mentioned this was because this also sets up the database and it gives you a little bit of test data. So what you're going to see me doing is just kind of overwriting some of the stuff that gets downloaded when you clone the project. I say that because I don't want you to be surprised when you open up DB and you see some weird files in there. We have 3 points of interest. We have the actual database file itself. Now, this is a database. When you're doing development, you use a database sometimes called SQLite. And this isn't really a proper database, but it behaves like a database. The reason we do this is a little bit faster, right? If you want to deploy this to a production level website, you're not going to use SQLite. And when we do deploy this, a big part of what you do is actually transitioning over to a database system called Postgres. Seamless. Don't stress about it. I just want you to know that SQLite is different. It stores all this stuff in a file rather than managing memory. So just for playing, just for development. The other thing we have are called migrations. So there's this level of abstraction, remember. So I think some of you have probably used SQL and you're used to like typing stuff or using some sort of user interface and creating these things by hand. Sinatra and especially Rails does this very well, manages changes to the database in what are called migrations. And in every migration, you can pack as much stuff as you want in there, but typically it'd be something like I'm going to create a migration to create a user table. And then I'm going to create a migration to create a post table, a comments table, a likes table, etc. So each one of these things allows you to change the database. And then if you decide that you messed up or you want to change something, it allows you to go back. That's
Do
what
you
we
have like a set number of migrations
You can have as many as you want. The only stipulation is that they're executed in alphabetical order. So you'll see like a little 0 there. So presumably the next one would be 1, just as long as they're executed in order. Otherwise, you're in big trouble. We also have some seeds files. The seed data is data that you just create to use as an example. So I've got the Finstagram stuff here already. This is what you're probably going to want to do. I think that this is part of your course material, is create some seed data. So every time you start up your project, you won't be working with an empty database. You'll actually have some data. Excuse me. The next point of interest happens in this directory here. So notice a couple of things. Actually, well, I didn't show you this part here first. This is a migration. This is like kind of that first step. Before you can start talking to the database, you got to prepare it. You got to write the tables. You got to tell it what columns are in these tables. And, you set other constraints as well. Like, make sure all certain columns only accept email addresses or only accept types of float or integer, all this kind of stuff. So in this migration, we have 4 tables: users, posts, comments, and likes. And in each of these tables, I'll just use the user one as an example, we have a column called username and a column called the avatar URL. This is your face, so that little picture, your email, and your password. And then we have something called the timestamps. And all this does is it just puts a little column in your table that tells you when this record was created. Well, 2 columns: when the record was created and when the record was last changed or updated. So in total, the users table has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns. Posts only have a couple. And here's where these relationships are getting established here. And this is very intro stuff. If this is like way over your head, you're not understanding it, that's okay. A lot of this stuff is provided to you. So you will be able to be successful without fully understanding. And it took me a long time as well. ORMs are not. I've been around long enough that at one point that they were kind of a new thing. So yeah, it took a while. Posts likewise has references the user. So this tells me this references method says, oh, this post somewhere in there belongs to a user. So this puts a user ID column in that table. Photo. Yeah, the picture, Instagram. There you go. And then, of course, created at, updated at. And here's those references again. So here's the comments. And I kind of spoke to this, but now this is what it actually looks like when you're creating this migration. Comments references users. Another way to say it, comment belongs to a user. Comment belongs to a post as well. This comment isn't going to be shown for every single post, just for this one post here. And then it's the actual text of the comment as well, of course. Created at, updated at, and likes. So this has only got 2, and there's not really anything in there. This is just a table to establish the relationship. I mean, aside from the created at and updated at, this here just has IDs. It references users and it references posts. And there's probably some other constraints as well, because a user can only like a post one time, or should be able to like a post one time. Shouldn't be able to just go click like as many times as you want and increase the likes. So very, very rudimentary introduction. Stuff that you're probably, this the reason why I clone this every single time is because I can't remember it either. So do your best. That's what we're here to help you. Okay, so that was the migration. We've seen the seeds. We haven't actually seen the model itself. The model is going to be disappointing. So here's a couple of models we've got. We've got posts, we got users. I left out likes and comments. This is all there is to it. That's it. There's a lot more happening here, though, just because we've got this nifty little thing up here. This less than sign used with what's called a class means that there's some parent class. It's kind of like when you're nesting those HTML boxes. Excuse me, I'm going to get some water and keep talking. That little arrow means that this model inherits all the characteristics of that parent class. When you inherit this way, post becomes an active record object. And because it inherited all those traits, it acts exactly like an active record object. Better. Okay, same thing, user. So all sorts of stuff we should do here, though, right? We're not going to get into this. This is all going to be part of your course material. So we're going to do some very simple demo. How is it so far? Are these things kind of just, are they coming together, or is this just nonsense I'm spewing? I see some nonsense, nodding on the nonsense. So, all right. So maybe, hopefully, seeing it in action will clear things up a little bit. So I'm going to keep things really simple. I'm only going to have one table in my database. And I'm going to take this, I'm going to start with the migration. So I don't need posts, don't need comments, don't need likes. I don't need any of this stuff too, but I'm just going to copy over it because, as I said, I can never remember. No shame in that. This is going to become my videos table. Remember, we're working with some very simple data. If I look in actions.rb, each one of these hashes is going to be a record in my database, one row in my database. So I only need two columns. I need the URL and I need the description that I've attached to it. So I'm going to, the URL is going to be of type string, and the description also will be of type string. We don't need that. We don't need that. So very simple, very easy database. If you can picture that Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, it's going to have 4 columns and then a whole bunch of URLs and a whole bunch of descriptions in the rows. Oops. So now, how do I actually run this thing? That's not a fair question. I don't think you guys know. I actually have to execute this migration. So what I've done here is I've actually written a little Ruby program. This is just ordinary Ruby. Nothing special about it. I use that gem that we installed called bundler. And if I want to use bundle, I say bundle exec rake db. Is that right? The other reason why I always write this stuff down, I think that's what it is, but it's also on the instructions here on the GitHub site. Oh yeah, here we are. So, I missed a step. I've got to actually create the database first. Watch what this does. So I'll just leave that up there. And I'm going to delete this, otherwise it's not going to make any sense. So that file there was my database. Don't dwell on that too much. This doesn't usually happen, right? The database management system usually manages the data for you, and it's not just like files like that. Files to be sure, but yeah, SQL is a different beast. So I'm going to run that database create on my bash command line. So bundle exec rake db create. And you should, did I mess that up? Oh, yes, of course. Okay, sorry. See what I did there? That's silly. Execute. If I did it right this time, I should see that database file pop up there again. So I got a brand new, fresh one. There's nothing in there. There it goes. Okay. So now I've got this migration. I do a similar instruction, except instead of create, I say migrate. And this is actually going to create the tables inside your database. Now, there's a stretch through the Compass course material that sort of gives you a more hands-on approach to this. If you're really curious, and if you've used SQL before, you can access your database using SQLite 3 from the command line. I'll just show you really quick. DB SQLite 3. There we go. So you see it changes. If you want to know what's going on, just get sort of a brief synopsis. You can type help with a period in front of it. So if I want to see what tables I've got, I can call this command here. And since I ran that migration, I should see one. Well, actually, I see two. I see some migration table, and I see the videos. This one presumably is keeping track of what migration has actually been executed. Because what's going to happen if you create a new migration, it's not going to create this one again. All your data is going to be preserved. It's just going to move on to the next migration in the list and then execute that one. And just for you folk who might have seen SQL, I can say, whoops, select star, come on, star from videos. Nothing there, right? Is that familiar to anyone? Select star from whatever. Yeah. We got a lot of engineers in here, and engineers love stuff like Excel and databases and all this kind of stuff. So it wouldn't have surprised me, but it doesn't surprise me either that experience is mixed. Okay, so if I want to get out of this, it's just like any sort of Unix command line utility. I can either sometimes hit Control-C or Control-D is pretty much the failsafe. Okay, so I've run the migration, first I created the database, then I ran the migration. Now I've got this thing sitting there. Still can't talk to the database. I still can't put stuff in and out, read it, update it, delete it, all that kind of stuff. To do that, I need to create a model. So I'm going to get rid of this one. We don't need it anymore. Just delete. There we are. And I'm going to rename this one. I'm just calling it video. Notice the pluralization. This is something you just kind of got to get used to, I'm afraid. But this one is singular. The migration is plural. When you're working with a video like this, you're typically working with one record. Maybe that's the justification for the pluralization, but it becomes natural over time. It's just something that's definitely going to trip you up while you're doing the exercises. So if I open up this video, I got to make a couple of changes. Well, actually just one change. Let's call it video, capital. You guys don't get you don't get really any object-oriented programming, but this is what's happening here. This is object-orientedness. The video model, video class, is inheriting from active record. All right. So that's that. So at this point, we're doing pretty good. Don't have any data though. This is a problem. So just to prove that and to make a dramatic discovery here, I'm going to take out all this stuff that I did by hand. Well, I'll just comment it out so that you can have it as a reference. And I'll comment, you know what? I'll leave this alone because I can still use this videos instance variable, but I need to acquire this data in a different way. So I'll just comment out the changes to provide you that some basis from which to work. So this one, I'm going to comment out all this stuff too. If I run it now, it's going to crash. And let me show you. Let me show you what happens. It's going to say videos instant or unknown instance variable videos. Is this one going? I think so. Yeah. Actually, I can just refresh that one. This one should crash. Yeah. Nil class. Okay, so it wasn't quite the error I was expecting, but what it's saying here, and this is something when you ask me for help or you ask Troy or Andrew for help, this is what we look at first. It's telling you where the error was found, and it's telling you it's going to go back through time. Actually, not in this case. This is a kind of a bad example for that. But it shows you how the error came about, or how it arose and what code was being executed. So it finally concludes that somewhere in my index.erb file, line 37 specifically, there's a null value, or a nil value, whichever you prefer. And if I look at that, I know it's nil. The nil value is videos. This is line 37. See, right? This is the line that you see in your Cloud 9. It's the exact same line here. So it's telling you, it's trying to be helpful. And usually it's pretty close. The reason why it's nil is because I didn't define it right here. So let's change that, right? Because I commented it out. It doesn't exist. It's nil. Switch it up a bit. We'll say videos. And this is where I'm going to query my database now. We don't have any data in there, but this is where we're going to get it. So this is very similar to what you saw on the slide. Video, we'll just say all. Give me every single one. This is legit. This will work. This time, if I did everything right, and assuming my database is working, actually, is my database working? Well, let's find out. Assuming I did everything right, I should see no videos because I commented all that stuff out. And what's basically happening, yeah, nothing. This is the bottom of the page. What's happening is that this is effectively an empty array. It's calling each on an empty array, and there's no item in there to look at. So it just stops executing, continues on. So let's actually put something in there. Now, if you're very astute, you would have noticed in your gem file a program called Tux. Now, this is a development tool. It's very similar to IRB. The difference is that it's IRB for Sinatra specifically. So if you run Tux instead of IRB, you're going to get all the database connections. You're going to be able to ask questions of the routes and all this kind of thing. IRB by itself won't let you do that. So let's try running Tux and see what video all gives us. So this is for testing purposes. I want to be clear on this. This is not some required step in the process, not like bundle exec migrate or bundle exec create. Those were required steps. This is for investigation, debugging, and all the rest. So if I look at this and I want to find out what this line is doing, copy that, paste it down here. It's just ordinary Ruby code. And it's telling me, oh yeah, active record relation. So it's not really quite an empty array, but it is basically an empty array. At least it'll be treated as such when you get to your ERB. Let's create a new video. So I'll say video. Notice I'm not making, well, this is mostly just for convenience. I will say video create. That should just do it. Okay, yep. And I'm going to pass it one of these values that I had before. Right, it's just a hash. Oh, I can't do that. Hang on. We'll have to do this the manual way. So there's my hash. There's my first key value pair, the URL pointing to the website where the video is hosted, comma separated, and my description. This was my first Rocket Stove promo video. I close that off with the curly brace and a bracket. Got to be mindful every opening bracket, you got to provide a closing bracket, otherwise you're going to get a syntax error. I press enter, and it worked. Said it committed the transaction. It spat out a whole bunch of this stuff. So if any of you are familiar with SQL, it actually gives you the SQL generated right here. This is what was actually executed. And you see those created at and those updated at. If you want to see what's in it again, just type in video like that. Shows you what's currently contained in there. So this create automatically inserted a record into my database. So if I go back to my Rocket Stove page and press refresh, I should see one video. I hope. Oh, there it is. There you go. That was my first Rocket Stove promo video. So add another. Whoops. So you're going to do this manually with Finstagram. So I'm going to use Tux again. You know what? Maybe I can just do the up arrow. And I'll take out all this stuff first. I'll only do 2 just because it's kind of time consuming. Copy that content. Paste that content. And now I've got to get the URL. So hopefully you kind of see what's going on here. Now, instead of hard coding this stuff into your actions.rb file, you're now handing it over to another independent piece of software. It's called a database management system. SQL is just a common language used to query different database management systems. There's tons of them. Whoops. Okay, I think that's that. Okay, so now I do that. Okay, so video ID 2. If I refresh, I should now see 2 videos. There you go. So now it's being entered into the database. No longer do I need this stuff here. Kind of the same thing, right? So if I execute video all down here, this is what's happening in the controller. There it is. Those are my all my videos in my database. Right? So there's other tricks here. So it's as long as you get longer and longer posts or longer and longer videos, whatever they are, you're going to want to cap that at 10, and then go on to the next page, or maybe automatically load them as you scroll down. This one, this is brute force stuff. It said, give me every single video in the database, which is good for demonstration purposes, not so good in real life necessarily. Okay, so a couple of big changes there, but not really big changes to our code. We actually only added one line. We took all that stuff out, and just for clarity, we didn't even change the ERB. The template has stayed exactly the same. Before we were using an array, now we're using one of these active record constructs that just happens to act like an array. So didn't even have to change anything. Okay, one more thing, and I think this is really handy to know, is this what the seeds file is all about, right? So I kind of already told you, it gives you that introductory data. Because if you're going to start developing this stuff, you're going to get to a point where it's like, oh, my database is all messed up. I got to start from scratch, or something's going to happen. Seeds just provides you that test data or that introductory data. So currently, right now, it's got some old stuff for the Finstagram stuff. I'm just going to take all this out and recycle it. Oh, what I should do before I get too far here is kind of introduce you to that last rake command. So you've already seen me do this. You saw me do a create. You saw me do a migrate, but you haven't seen me do this one. This is how we introduce that data. Why would you do this? This is a question for you guys. Why would I want to reseed my database? What if you made a mistake? What if your data is mangled? You just want to start from scratch. This makes it easy to start from scratch. So let's take that. Let's take this. We're gonna recycle this whole thing here. And we're going to use it to seed our database. So let's get rid of that. We don't need that. Yeah. All right. Whoa, come back. What happened there? Clean this up a bit. So we got videos. We'll just make it an ordinary variable. We'll say videos, video create. Video. All right. That's all we got. We only have one table. No one's keeping track of who put these things up there. So just ordinary Ruby code. Nothing special, just assigning a variable and calling this video create, just like we did in Tux. So we'll get out of this. And what do you think is going to happen? Whoops, come on. There it goes. Jesus, it took a long time to get out. So I'm going to seed this data. How many records am I going to have? How many videos am I going to see on my page when I seed this thing? All three? Seed. There we go. So 3. It's loading. Okay, I think it's starting here. There's my first one, second one, third one, fourth one. I got 5 of them now, right? So every time I seed that data, watch if I do it again. Just adding new records to the database. So now I'm going to have 8. This is getting too big to keep reloading, so I'll keep it at that. So I've made a mistake, right? My data's all mangled, and now I got to reset. I want to get back to a sane place in my life where I only had 3 videos instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 videos, right? I made a mistake. This is why it's good to create seed data. Now, hopefully this is actually built in, but I should be able to say bundle exec rake db drop. Drop the database. Get rid of it. Hopefully it's defined. I actually never even checked. It did. Okay. Oh, you notice my my little db file disappeared as well. Just erased everything. Problem now is that my database is gone. I've got to create this thing again. If I refresh this thing, it's going to crash. It's going to say no database connection or something. Yeah, active record statement invalid. No such table. Oh, okay. Got to create my database over again. Bundle exec rake db create. You might be able to shortcut this and make sure, just reset. Actually, there might even be a reset. You know what? Let's try that. No, let's just do it by hand. Okay, so we create, we migrate. So at this point, everything's good. I'm not going to see this error anymore, but I haven't put any information into my database yet. Yeah, so it works, but no videos. One last thing, seed. That's the thing I just did. So I got some test data. So if I ever mess anything up, I can just go and reset everything. Now, what I'm curious about, so I'm just going to make sure that works first. Yep, there's my video, looking good. All right. What I wanted to test, I'm actually kind of uncertain about, is if there is, in fact, let's mess up my database again. So I've got too many videos. And reset. Sometimes this is, sometimes it's not. Let's try it. So it looked like it created it, but it didn't migrate. Is that what everyone else is reading as well? It said I tried to reset my database, but I didn't actually create the migration. So I guess long story short, reset's not really that helpful. It'll save you one command, but this should crash now if my table isn't created. Yeah. Migrate. Seed. Anything that saves you time is good when it comes to programming. It's truly time is money. So seeding and automated testing and all the rest, it's there for you. Okay. That's basically all I've got in terms of lecture content. Is there anything you'd like me to show or any questions?
The migrate, does it like name itself? How are you creating
Oh,
these
yeah.
migrate files?
Okay, so this that's a really good question. So it sounds to me like you want to just create a migration and have it organize itself so that it knows.
I don't know anything about migration. Like,
Okay.
you just did a migrate again, but nothing appears to have changed, so I don't know what that means.
Okay, well I can make another migration. Let's do that. Let's copy this one. Whoops. Well, I downloaded it. Let's copy duplicate. That's what I want.
Okay, so it's a manual process. It's not an automatic process.
It is in this case. Generally not though. For you guys, there's a nifty gem in here. Let's see if they have it. I think it's this one, Sinatra Contrib, which gives you what these rake tasks that you saw, where I was typing in bundle exec rake. I think it's this one that will say bundle exec rake create migration, maybe something like that, right? But this is what it's doing. So I'm going to show you the manual way.
Will it rename itself again, like to one?
It will if you do that automated
Okay.
generation, automatically generated. But really, the only difference it's going to make is that it's going to put a timestamp, whereas I'm just making sure that it's in alphabetical or alphanumeric order, I guess, in this case. So I will say create. I don't know. Let's create the comments. I don't have users. I'll say create user table. There we go. So I'm just going to recycle this one. Create users. It's good to be descriptive. And I will say email and password. This isn't especially secure. Maybe we'll actually use this as an example when we get to the encryption and all that kind of stuff. I think that's probably good. I guess I could let that user set a username. Looks good. Okay, so a new migration. Now, just to show you that that there's nothing to be suspicious of, I'm going to use that SQLite3. You're not going to have to do this, so this is just me showing off. So just hopefully as a part of a demonstration, give you a kind of an appreciation for what's happening here. So here's my tables, schema migrations, and videos. Once I run this migration, what should happen is I should see schema migrations, which is keeping track of my various migrations. My videos, we've already seen that, and my users. I should see one extra table. So I'm going to drop out of that for a second. Oh, it didn't let me. Usually you can hit Control-Z and put it in the background, but it's not letting me do it. Migrate. There we are. So, something happened. Big error. What happened? Goodness. Whatever I did something really it doesn't like. Schema migrations. That's weird.
Do you have to create your table, or does it just look off of?
Yes, you have to create the table. That's what is should be happening here. So it says uninitialized constant create users table. What's the difference? Okay, that's something I'm going to have to look into. I can tack that on as part of the lecture notes. Is it something obvious? Man, I hate it when that kind of stuff happens. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
No. What was your question?
The version control, I guess, for migrations and how it's naming conventions work, if it's automatically named or.
Yeah, it's yes and no. This time it wasn't. It was just manually. But yeah,
And like, if it was the system doing it, does it count by numbers?
usually yes. It was timestamps usually, so it'll be like starting with the year and then all the way down to like the second.
Those.
Does
Okay.
the create table name need to match up with the class name?
Doesn't it?
I might have to.
I don't think Sinatra is that sophisticated. Create.
Yeah,
Oh,
this-
users.
This is Ruby.
Oh.
This is on Rails, so this might not be the problem. But
You might be right, but this is an active record thing, so
Yeah.
okay.
it's still from active record migration. I called 5.0 as well, but I don't think that should make much of a difference. This version should still.
This one is the older one, yeah.
It should still do it though.
Oh, and that time it worked. Thanks.
Yay!
Thanks, Troy. That's wonderful. All right, thank you. So at this point, we could create a user model and perhaps some user seed data. One thing I want to note here, the schema file. I don't think I spoke to this one. The schema is actually what describes your database. This is automatically generated. And this is something that you as a programmer don't touch. The only way that you change these things is through migrations. So here's the one I just created, the users with the name, email, and password, and the videos, which is what we had previously. So this was added automatically, and this is what happens when you run bundle exec rake db create. Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? That was a good question.
Bless you.
Any questions about how this is organized, how it relates to your application? Nothing like that. All right. That at least should give you some, frame of reference within to work when you proceed through today's course material. And of course, you can ask me or Troy. And again, thank you, Troy, for fixing that.